had a visual tour of what it is.
So I'm touching it here.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of lifting this around a bit, and I can definitely say that it has a different touch to it than most of your canvases.
Yes. So it's very heavily stapled. Very, very heavily stapled because the material I was using was not. It was quite thin and it was quite movable, so it's heavily stapled. But I think what is the art piece itself is what I've done to it to make it stay in place. It has this dimension of mirroring.
It's a very interesting paradox that you choose you what you have done to keep it in place, but you choose to neglect the two pieces that would have made it static and rigid to begin with. But let's continue.
Yes.
How was the journey of making this stay in place?
No, but that's actually a very good point, because it almost I almost connected to a sound. What sound would it take to place? How many sounds will it make if you just place two bars as opposed to that stapling? I mean, it's like I can't interpret that sound very.
So for the listeners, how many staples are we speaking about there? What would be a normative way of stapling a canvas, and how many staples?
I think usually, let's say you have on the canvas this side, let's say that you have, let's say 10 to 12 staples. I think 10 to 12 staples kind of covers this big space. So it's heavily stapled. I think audience understands that. So I don't think we need to reiterate that. But there are two places it's very heavily stapled, and those places correspond to something that I will be. I don't want to speak of it right now, but it's very heavily stapled in two places. And if I left it alone, that would if I didn't even paint the canvas, it would be the artwork on its own. But I painted it.
So how was the process of painting it? What happened on the front side that we're all able to look at?
Well, I'm heavily at the time. I was feeling the process has led me into direction where connection that I've felt was the one with abstract expressionism, artists like Robert Motherwell, Pollock, etc., etc. I think those are the artists that have been really heavily referenced pre-COVID. I mean, COVID has created such a renaissance in the art process that it's very interesting to see how that's going to develop. But before COVID, art was still enamored with that dimension, and fashion was definitely repeating that, reiterating that, because again, fashion had this dimension of inferior complex to art. I think things have changed so much over the last couple of years that it's incredible. But ochre and like burnt yellow, those are the colors that kind of go quite a lot within these artists. The black as well. And I think it's interesting to me looking at this piece because I'm questioning now, was it the aesthetic of the thought process that I was attracted to, or was it or did the piece come about on its own? So was my mind following the aesthetic of the known, or was it its own product or its own individual product? Because if you go through the past and the war-torn Serbia that I've not grown up in, but definitely, and then the refugee camp, and obviously those places were not in the nicest neighborhoods. So what you kind of see a lot around you is a lot of torn buildings, a lot of neglected buildings, a lot of things that are falling, that are decaying. So my eye, the sense organ, and both sense organs.
Both sense organs, yeah.
Yeah, both dimensions of two different sense organs. It's such a nice trick of the English language. I do sometimes wonder how did that develop? How did that kind of come on its own? Do you think if it was like subconscious, or if it was at one point pushed strategically? Because that dimension of I and I is very beautiful to me.
Yeah, but that is almost an episode on its own.
Yeah, we're not going to go into that
No.
now. So this whole piece mimics that again. It mimics what I've seen. But what is important for me for people to know is that these are the thoughts that are kind of coming around in the aftermath of the piece created. That is also very interesting because the aura of a piece is of one type, because it is the transfer of the transfer of the moment within. But on the other side, it acts as
To me, this goes a bit back to what you spoke about at the start. It is a practice to speak about it, and that doesn't necessarily mean that, like, a part of that conversation is the entire creation process, but that doesn't mean that it is settled down to its concrete meaning or what it necessarily means to you at that moment in time. Sometimes that develops and comes to you maybe weeks afterwards or months afterwards.
Very. But again, we're going back to this dimension between art and language. It is so utterly fascinating. And to me, art offered that dimension of transcendence because, as a child of psychiatrist, you do understand this dimension of measuring up of the self with your own surroundings and what type of feedback loop that creates. Me, art, and there's often talks of who created artwork, especially when those artworks, and this is especially in the context of paintings, who has created an artwork, and is it an artwork if somebody else has created it? To me, yes, but it's somebody else's artwork. And what I mean by that, because to me, art is heavily connected to the dimension of liberation. I don't think that, and well, it kind of falls onto into itself, you can say. I don't think that one can achieve liberation if one's own hands are not involved, if one whole body isn't involved. But then at the same time, one body, if you write an email to or if you employ an assistant or potentially hire people from the Chinese village to paint work for you, you have also employed your body and your mind within this dimension for that artwork to occur.
I think once again we're into a very big topic on the side here.
Yes, but I think that's the most beautiful dimension of art, the fact that those questions overlap, and we're asking them as a questions. We're not going to discuss them. I think some mystery. I'm talking about my own process because it's heavily involved with my own psychoanalysis and my own transcendence. But some mystery.
So to you, it's important that you have been involved in all parts and have executed all parts in the creation of this piece.
It has been, at least. I think for me that was the most. Oh, that's so interesting. Again, that's so actually very interesting now when we're kind of coming to it. It is important to me because I felt that I had this absolutely immense energy that was imploding on me that I wanted to disassociate with.
To direct use, start to filter out.
I mean, it's so fascinating to think about that somebody who has experienced this level of granularity of the flow itself has had such a big blind spot for how one's own body has moved through it. So this energy, and I think we're also nicely kind of coming up to the dimension of painting on this work. and that is that I needed to this energy was absolutely crushing me and imploding on me, and I didn't know how to handle it, and I didn't know how to deal with that. So this dimension of just throwing something and something, this dimension of expulsion was something that kind of was laying in the descriptive dimension of the artistic transcendence, or at least what is offered to us through literature and books, and how art is described. So for me, it was really important to have that dimension where I could see the feedback on its own directly, and through that exchange start to grasp the coordinates that I was existing within.
So how did these coordinates manifest themselves onto this canvas?
So yes, I mean, we're starting with that ochre color that I very much love, um, and it's beautiful in its own, and it's also kind of start sometimes thinking about the gold that would have rusted. Not rusted gold, cause it doesn't rust, but I meant gold paint that would lose its shine or lose its luster, and then subsequently become this ochre. Or it definitely ties to a dusty gold in this way or the other. It also is the color of urine, which also annoyingly ties to my story, that is, and the dimension of trauma. But it is as it is. And over that ochre, you see parts of yellow. And I think my own interesting heritage kind of comes within, because my mother's side comes from a Russian aristocracy that moved or transitioned to Serbia. And I think, and then something happens that I'm not going to go into, and then things kind of go quite dark. And then on the other side, you have this painted, like that darkness, or whatever is happening there. It doesn't seem like an event that is completely engulfed in black, but it's an event that is covered with it. Kind of comes this white paint that is glued onto it a bit haphazardly, and I think to me, like, it almost kind of defines my father's strength, because my father is a very he's an intense person that early in our life shone quite strongly, and has a very strong moral compass within certain dimensions. So, but something about him is also there is this like Americanized dimension where the American dream has been offered to them, which kind of connects to me to this white color, and how this is structured, because the black and the yellow are quite an expensive oil color, and oil color is very, very expensive. But the white one it's just a simple white wall painting. Now white wall paint. So you have the dimension of something like quite. It also again ties to that the hegemony also of the American culture, which I'm not criticizing. There is a reason why this is white in many ways. It's cheap paint, but it's still white. The question comes: do you take does one take the expensive darkness or the cheap whiteness? Where do you want to go? Where is the flow going? But I think I like that dimension, because it is also work that kind of talks about that clash between the old world and the new world, where that old world is destroying, it is being deconstructed in a not constructive way, while that whiteness kind of comes over as both as a glaze that is kind of it can be meant that it can be meant in a sense that it's hiding something, like that it's trying to cover something, It can be also a work of somebody who is trying to make things better in whichever dimension that is possible, even if it's a cheap one in a sense.
Well, this white to me is very interesting because I can't say if it's a positive white or it's a destructive white. And why I say that is that it's not like the behind of the more older, expensive, maybe even artistically correct material. It's not like it's just been applied where we can see it. There's been a lot more of it, but that has been abolished by this thickness of the white that has come over it.
It's a definitely very information rich piece, in the sense, especially the fact that it's done by my hand. Um, because the thickness of the paint and then the subsequent layer or subsequent layering, each layer shows amount of information for the ones that have ability to read or have learned how to read it throughout their lifetime. But it also has drips, layers, how the paint interacts on its own, but also the fact that paint is chipping off because the paint has been covered with a glue, and now it's chipping off as it is here because oil and wall paint are not usually they don't coincide, and as such this piece kind of continues its own life, and I think that's the most one of those beautiful dimensions of it, because the piece on its own continues its own life and acts as a measure of time due to the fact that it's going to undergo a morphability that is of the irreversible character.
And which has also been built into it by the choice of not putting in the stretcher bars that would have given it stability, that wouldn't have made it move in such a way that it would be that prone to chipping.
Yes, yes, very much so. Very much so. So I think of, and that's this is what we're speaking about, this work, and as you see, like my work ties to a lot of those things that I've both experienced, and it's very difficult to make a work about somebody else's experience. You can always describe somebody else's experience, but you can never. I think you've taught me that quite a lot. That you're always a mystery to me, but also I think I also understood why.
You understood why?
Yeah, earlier yesterday when we spoke. Yeah.
Oh, I haven't seen through.
No, you
Seen
ha-
through me.
no, I have not. I can't do that. You're absolutely dimensions of you are ingraspable for me. However, the shapes that I often operate with are within the triangle and the circle. And while you said something really interesting yesterday about the square, and I thought it's very interesting because square does not often arise within my own work. That's not a shape that I'm.
So when you are expressing yourself on the canvas, the square isn't necessarily the shape. You're a shape that is heavily used by you.
Yeah, it's not very heavily represented, no. So I think that's the interesting dimension of this work. And I think there's another thing that I want to say about this and another work. I will post that work on Instagram, and I think I will post a brief video of me speaking about that work, but we're not going to introduce it now. But those are the two works that have survived the first purge. Every artist has their own purge.
I personally think that is very interesting that this sort of have survived, because it seems to be some connection between you and this work that has made it so that this one has been kept throughout this, because since this is one of your earliest works, you have been changing studios and location quite a bit, which naturally gives, I would almost say it naturally forces you into a position where you will have to make some decisions of what do you bring, what do you change, what do you want to keep as is, etc. And this piece has actually ended up traveled that entire journey, even with its sides and its structure and everything that goes in it.
You know what that makes me think of? It makes me think of the worth of a piece and the time frame it has undergone and survived.
Well, this is definitely a survivor behind us.
Yeah, it definitely is. But it also makes me think, because I have to say, and I'm not necessarily afraid to expose my own ignorance. I think my journey has been plenty. It has been abundant in lessons and knowledge that I've acquired that definitely surpass even those that have studied art and have a higher level of. Even those that have studied art. Fact that. But also, it's also kind of it's also connected to that American hegemony that we're speaking of, especially like plastic fantastic movement and the overconsumption, etc., etc. We don't those songs are sung. We know them already. But I want to say is that I couldn't even, despite the fact that artifacts are rare, I did not necessarily understand why artifacts have a certain value tied to them. But this piece has kind of made me understand that. It has definitely made me understand this dimension that of aura and of an energetical exchange that happens, that something survives throughout this time. Because especially if you think about this dimension of human destruction that is very heavily embedded within us, and that kind of a constant craveness for exchange and newness. So I think this dimension that and something can survive throughout centuries is definitely tied to value, and should be tied to value, because it definitely it poses some really interesting questions that I think I would love for Sean Carroll to answer. Or he's cosmologist though, but he is also a physicist, isn't he?
He is now a philosophist. He is also a philosophist now.
Philosophist, yes. Oh, but he is. He's definitely, that's exactly what he is. I think he also, I'm not sure if he used that word, but he's philosopher and a physicist.
No, he is a philosopher now. He is in a philosopher position.
Yes, but yes, but I mean him as a physicist. I would like for him as a physicist to be able to explain that.
This. Interesting.
Right? I think that kind of becomes really interesting, because our species is so prone to demolishing things, and that for something to have a constitution of something to have had an aura to survive whatever it has been exposed to. I think there is a very interesting dimension there to unpack for other artists that are listening. Yes.
I do agree.
And how long have you been speaking on for now? Can I sneak in one more thing, you think?
But yes, you can sneak in. You can sneak in a little tiny bit more.
I don't think we have to cut. People are completely fine with me asking what time is it and how long I've spoken about things. Like, I don't want to drain people, so. But there is a different dimension that I find also very fascinating with this work, and it's one of these works that again begs the question of time. I will continue this discussion, I think, in maybe not next time, but I think it will. You know what? We will pick up this topic later on. But what I want to say is that there is this dimension of time that is connected to this, and time traveling. Because I was thinking, does one time travel the closer one comes to cultural epicenters? And does that also pan out given the amount of income? How far in time, how further in time are wealthy against the less fortunate, and how does time connect within geographical locations? And I think that's very interesting, because to me this art piece is very heavily associated by the works and the thought process that has governed it, but also but what it has seen. While when I came to London, and yes, digital art is something that has really exploded to a dimension that I think even the artists in the known haven't been as acquainted with that. But I think this dimension of time travel and what is considered art and when is it considered art is something that is really fascinating.
Sounds like a topic we will have to dive more into later.
Yeah. So thank you for listening. And I want to say one more thing.
Yes? Many more things becomes...
No.
Let's speak of one more thing.
No. That's not what I meant, but is that
The first of 10 one more things, but let's go.
But it's going to be great.
Which leads us into...
into the fact that this podcast is something, as much as it is recording of my oral practice, it's also very tightly connected to the role of communication that I feel very identified with. So there's this thing within me that is very connected to sharing the experience in hope that it can help lighten others' path. And that is the second strongest reason why this space exists right now. And in order to support that, me and Chris have created a label which is called Great. Christian has a cap there. He can put it on so he can show it to us. But the Great label sustains of t-shirts, hoodies, and it's just like great merch. And my idea was that I think there is so much dark subliminal messaging happening all the time. I wanted for two people when they sit next to each other and they have great merch on. It says right over the left, on the left side, right above heart, it says great. Or in this instance, it says great. And there's an Instagram that I will share, and hopefully you will be able to support us in that way, even if that by following or sharing our content. Thank you for listening. Next time.
Goodbye.